Welcome to Think Tech Hawaii. Our show today is Asia in Review, and I'm your host, Ellise Akazawa. My guest today is Mihoko Matsubara, who is in town very briefly from Tokyo. Miho, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're going to be talking today about international cooperation on cybersecurity. This is a topic that Miho is well versed on and knows a lot about. And Miho, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background, where you're working now, and a little bit about your history so our viewers can get a sense of how you acquired all this knowledge on cybersecurity?
Thank you, if I have any. So I currently work with Hitachi Systems based in Tokyo, but I also have a title as adjunct fellow with Pacific Forum CSIS, Honolulu. And before that, I worked for the Japanese Ministry of Defense for 9 years as a liaison officer to work with the US government.
Okay, and then where were you educated? Because did you get both of your degrees in the United States, or did you get one in Japan and one in the US?
So I got my bachelor's degree at Waseda University in Tokyo.
Okay.
But after I did 9 years service in the Ministry of Defense in Japan, I went to Washington, D.C. to do my master's degree on Fulbright at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies.
Okay, so your Fulbright, did you get that specifically to study at Johns Hopkins?
Well, I was able to choose, but I chose Johns Hopkins because I saw that the program was wonderful, and I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. because it has the really a great dynamics of international studies and international security studies.
Definitely. And how did you get interested in cybersecurity?
Well, because I was lucky enough to spend my 9 years in the Ministry of Defense and work with my American counterparts. So I got really interested in, and I was able to develop my knowledge and expertise about international security issues. And I also did my degree in strategic studies focusing on international security. So because cybersecurity is getting more and more important in the international arena, I got more interested in, especially about security and cybersecurity. So that's how I decided to get this position.
Oh, okay. And I know you've published extensively. Would you mind letting us know a few of the places that you've published?
So I published my articles through Asahi Shimbun and Kyodo News in Japan, and also Japan Times in English in Japan. I also did, a lot.
You have published a lot.
Well, I did my publications through Stanford Journal, Harvard, and also through Swiss think tank, ISN, World Politics Review, Foreign Policy Digest, CNN, Pacific Forum CSIS, of course.
Of course.
That's my background. Thank you.
And then also a few places that I remember you published also recently were Harvard Asia Quarterly and Diplomat.
Yes.
So wide range of publishing experience because a lot of people are really interested in your analysis. So when we talk about cybersecurity, what exactly does that term mean? Because I hear it used a lot, and I don't know if everybody has the same definition of what exactly that means. So when you're talking about cybersecurity, what are you referring to?
Okay, so some people talk about cybersecurity as only limited to internet or computer security, but my definition is the correction of policy, safeguards, technology and tools to protect information and communication technology related assets, and also people to use those assets.
Okay. And why do you think cybersecurity is becoming so much more of an issue now? You know, we've had computers and computer technology for a really long time, but what is it about where we are right now that makes cybersecurity such a major issue in international politics?
Oh, because it's really terrifying to think about how much we rely on the internet or information and communication technology in every single aspect of our life. You can just name it, like our finance system, medical services, water supply, energy supply, military networks, or government services. everything is on the internet almost, or the computer networks. So if a single point that breaks down, it's going to mean that it's going to really, our life is going to be in danger. So, and because a lot rely on the internet and communications, so that's why it's really hard for us to protect our assets and ourselves.
Oh, okay. So you've had a lot of experience in the US, but now you're based in Japan. What do you think are the differences between the challenges in Japan and the challenges in the United States, or do you think we're all facing the same sorts of challenges?
Again, the yes and no. So I think there are universal issues and challenges on any country faces, and also Japan also has unique issues.
Okay.
Only seen in Japan.
So what are the international challenges, the one that everyone faces?
Oh, so first issue is there are countless number of potential targets to protect, and second is because for the globalization and also better connectivity, every single country started to use globally standardized software and computer systems. So it's really convenient for us to make our life easier to live with. However, it means that hackers are more easy to figure out our vulnerability is. So there are also pros and cons. Convenient, but also vulnerable.
And what are some of the challenges that are unique to Japan?
So this is my personal opinion. But I think that Japan has been in a very unique positions to cherish its own safety for a long time. So in Japanese old saying, we say that the water and safety are free. Because Japan has been a so safe country for 1,000 years. And we are lucky enough to have abundance of the water supplies. So we don't have to worry about security or water supplies, not so much. So cybersecurity is under the umbrella of security.
Okay.
So it's up to how to look at things. But I think that from international perspective, Japan has been a little bit ambivalent of protecting their own safety. So that's why we are kind of behind to how to be better at cybersecurity. And
why do you think Japan has been ambivalent about its own security?
Oh, because Japan is an island country, so it's being protected by the oceans.
So just threats that it hasn't had to think about before. Now with new technology comes new threats.
Yes, because thanks to the internet, it's very convenient for us. But also at the same time, it's also convenient for our adversary to launch borderless and stealthy attacks at any time, regardless of where they are at.
So I think one of the major issues that comes up a lot when we talk about cybersecurity is its relationship to privacy. So how do you see the relationship between cybersecurity and privacy? Do you think there's a strong link, or do you think it's a weak link?
I think there's a strong link, but also I think cybersecurity is also beyond the scope of privacy too. The reason why I'm saying that is because there's no really specific or internationally agreed definition of cyber attacks as of today. So cyber attacks can be like spams you receive all the time, and also it can be the website defacement, and also it can be stealing your information or your banking information, or stealing trade secrets from your own company, or even diplomatic secrets or national security, or it can be like physical disruption to your water supply.
So there are all different ways that someone could attack you.
So that's why I said it can be strong link to your own privacy, but also at the same time different issues going to be associated with.
I think in the U.S. right now, especially with the Edward Snowden affair and everything that's going on with that, there's a lot more attention that's being paid to privacy first and foremost, but also cybersecurity in general. What's the reaction like in Japan? Are people a lot more aware now than they have been in the past?
In terms of cyber attacks or the private information?
Private information.
I think Japanese are it's kind of controversial, but I think Japanese are really more cautious about protecting their private information. So it seems to me that the Japanese media is now really more worried about the protection of private information. But to me, this Edward Snowden case indicated that how it's difficult for any organization or in any country to protect their sensitive information from insider threats. Because even if they have a great firewall to protect their information from outside threats, if somebody has a vicious idea to leak that information to outsiders, it can happen.
Yeah, how do you protect against that?
So I think I don't see many discussions about that from that perspective, and I hope that we can have better idea to how to deal with that kind of stuff.
Okay, so in your own personal opinion, as a cybersecurity analyst, what do you think the role is for private businesses and then the government? Because I feel that many people think it's the responsibility of the government, perhaps, to protect against cyber attacks and cyber warfare. But what roles, how does that role differ from the role that private corporations are expected to play in defending their own information?
Well, so each country has a different definition of critical infrastructure. But if you look at the internet infrastructure or computer networks, usually they're in the hands of private companies or private companies owned critical infrastructure. So it means that even the military networks or the government computer networks rely on the security level of private industry. So I think there are significant amounts of security that the private industry can contribute to the national security and or national cybersecurity.
All right. We'll take a break right there. Stay with us after the break. We'll continue talking about cybersecurity, international cooperation with Mihoko Matsubara. We'll see you soon. Welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii. Today's show is Asia in Review, and my guest is Mihoko Matsubara. I'm your host, Ellise Akazawa. Today we're talking about international cooperation on cybersecurity, and Miho is kind enough to join us on her very brief visit in Honolulu from Tokyo. So Miho, thanks for making time out of your extremely busy schedule.
Thank you for having me.
So right before the break, we were talking a little bit about the role that the private sector plays in addition to the government in safeguarding information. So you had mentioned just before we broke that a lot of critical infrastructure is reliant on the private industry. In the private industry. And is that how it is in Japan as well as it is in the United States?
So, sure enough, well, the definition of the critical infrastructure is different from between Japan and the United States. Japan has a lot less critical infrastructure sectors compared to the United States. The United States has 18 sectors, but Japan has only 60% of the number of critical infrastructure sectors.
So I'm not expecting you to give me a definitive or exhaustive list of what all those sectors are, but could you just name a few examples of what might be considered a critical sector?
Oh, so in the United States, the defense industries is considered as a part of critical infrastructure, but which is not the case in Japan.
Oh, okay. So that's a pretty big difference.
It's a pretty big difference. And when I talk to people in the government or the industry in any countries, people really get amazed.
That does seem to be a pretty big difference. So other examples of critical infrastructure, would that be utilities such as water and energy? Would those be key as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And also the finance, the banking systems.
Okay. So private industry, what is the relationship, I guess, like in Japan between how closely they work with the government? Because I imagine that if the government wants to enforce more stringent laws regarding cybersecurity, it needs to work very closely with the private sector. Is that how it is in Japan?
So Japan, the Japanese government has 6 private-public partnerships to share information on cyber threats with the private industries, and they were initiated by Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, and also Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, as well as the National Police Agency from a perspective of the prevention of cyber crimes.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about how companies, I guess, sort of embrace that role with the government. So is that something that the government initiates? So for example, does the Japanese government say, we're interested in building these alliances, or is that something that's initiated on the private side?
As far as I understand, they are all initiated by the Japanese government. So the information sharing is done based upon a voluntary basis. So the government cannot force any companies to submit any sensitive information. And I think it's also true in the United States too. It's all voluntary basis.
All right. And in your experience, and just speaking from your personal capacity in Japan, what are people in Japan most threatened by in terms of cybersecurity? Are they worried about internal attacks or internal disruptions, or are they mostly concerned with attacks and disruptions coming from outside of Japan?
I haven't seen any statistics on that, so I don't know. But I think they have been more worried about cyber espionage to steal their information, including private information, trade secrets, and also national security or diplomacy-related information.
Okay, so I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about cyber espionage, and that's something I feel that has been discussed a lot recently in the U.S. media. So when you say cyber espionage, what specifically are you referring to? Just that taking of that information?
So cyber espionage meaning that using cyber tools, for instance, you can send out spear phishing emails to implant malware to your system, and then you can correct and search information you want to get and then steal the information.
And how widespread are attacks like those? Are they very widespread? Do we only see them sometimes? What's that like?
Well, usually the organizations who are targeted or who already got some information theft, they do not want to talk about it.
Okay, that's understandable. So how does someone or how does a company prevent against attacks like that, or a government even? I mean, how do you prevent something like that from happening?
Well, you can mitigate the risk, but it's really hard for us to prevent everything because there's so enormous amount of potential targets.
And it seems like there must be threats really coming from all different directions, no matter where you're located in the world, because previously, war was the domain of governments or state-to-state warfare, and that's typically how people conceive of war. But I mean, for cyber attacks or cyber warfare, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be another state or government conducting that against you. It could be individual citizens, it could be corporations, it could be anybody.
Groups, anybody.
So that makes it seem like that adds another dimension in terms of complexity and challenge.
Yeah, so that's why it's really difficult for us to establish effective law to how to mitigate risk and how to enforce law against them.
And speaking of laws, is there any sort of international legal framework or any international treaty about cyber attacks or cyber espionage or anything like that?
Initiated by European leadership, we now have international convention on cyber crimes. But unfortunately, not every single country has joined the treaty. So
who has signed on to that treaty?
Japan did.
Okay. And any other major countries?
European countries, like United States.
Okay.
So there are lots of Western countries.
Okay. And what about China? Do you know if China is a signatory?
I do not think so.
Okay. So.
But we have a positive news though.
Okay.
Are you? So a couple of weeks ago, at the United Nations meeting, major powers, including the United States, Japan, Russia, and China, all agreed upon that the international law does apply to cyberspace.
Okay, so international law does apply. Okay.
But the next step is how it's going to be applied.
That's really interesting. It just seems like there are so many challenges associated with this, and even if countries have signed onto a treaty, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is going to abide by those terms.
Well, it's always difficult and takes a lot of time to establish internationally agreed framework. So it's understandable, and because cyberspace is so dynamic and it's emerging and evolving so fast, so it's difficult to have very specific law or rules to apply to cyberspace. Because we are still, each country is still trying to figure out what it is. So when you get together as a group, it's going to be difficult.
Absolutely. It just almost seems, like there's no way that you can keep up that quickly in terms of an evolving international legal framework or international even agreement. If the technology is changing so fast and what people are capable of doing is changing so quickly, then by the time you finally get all the parties to the table to discuss what a framework might look like, everything that you were planning on bringing to the table might seem outdated.
Yeah, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean that we should give up. We still have to make efforts to establish the international norms of behavior to apply to cyberspace.
So obviously the topic of today's program is international cooperation, and for me that seems like that would present some challenges in itself, because if countries are trying to work together, doesn't that mean they also shouldn't be spying on each other or attacking each other? So how does international cooperation, how does that work in practice?
Well, so there are multiple layers for international cooperation. They can be bilateral, multilateral, or even for the international community on the whole. And I think it's better to start out as bilateral because it includes only 2 countries. So it's easier, and also it's better to start out among or between allies because they already have same or similar interest in terms of security, and they have the same values to share.
So the mutual trust is already there, and the mutual values are already there. So, for example, between the United States and Japan, is there any sort of formal agreement between our 2 countries?
So in June 2011, at 2+2 meeting, the Japanese and the United States government, for the first time in public, they publicly declared that it's so important for the 2 countries to continue to cooperate over cybersecurity.
And in terms of practical application, what does that mean that the United States will cooperate with Japan? Does that mean they'll share information? Does that mean they'll share threats? What does that mean in practice?
So of course, sharing information on cyber threats, and also it means that they can work together to establish international laws to apply to cyberspace, and it's also they can cooperate together to establish a mechanism for confidence building for other countries too, because anything can happen these days, and you don't want to end up with encountering a totally unexpected incident and you do not know whom to talk to. So in emergency, you don't want to pick up the phone and you don't know whom to talk to.
So in addition to Japan cooperating with the United States, does Japan cooperate with any other countries in the region in a similar manner?
So Japan started in cybersecurity cooperation with the UK recently, and also India, like 1 year ago. And Japan has been working with ASEAN countries for the last few years for capacity building.
Okay. And then what about anything between Japan and South Korea? Anything there?
Actually, it's very interesting that Japan, China, and South Korea has an agreement for cybersecurity over the last couple of years, but I do not see any progress on the cybersecurity front because the relationship between the 3 countries are sometimes really difficult.
I can imagine that would be sort of a difficult trilateral grouping of countries to get them on the same page regarding cybersecurity. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about your own personal experiences. Just as a private citizen living in Japan, have you experienced any cyber attacks, or have there been any big cyber attacks in Japan in recent memory?
I think as a Japanese, one of the most the biggest cyber attacks against Japan is the case of cyber espionage case against Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which is one of the biggest Japanese defense contractor.
Okay, and I'm just going to pause you right there, and I'll have you finish the story when we get back from the break. Stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Think Tech Hawaii. Our show today is Asia in Review. We're talking about international cooperation on cybersecurity. I'm your host, Ellise Akazawa, and my guest today is Mihoko Matsubara. She is a cybersecurity analyst at Hitachi Systems and adjunct fellow at Pacific Forum CSIS, and she is one of the young experts on cybersecurity. So Miho, we're really glad that you made time out of your busy schedule and your brief stopover in Honolulu.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. So right before the break, we were talking about some recent cyber attacks, and we left off with one on Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, so back in September 2011, Yomiuri Shimbun, which has the largest circulation in Japan.
So that's the biggest newspaper in Japan.
Biggest newspaper in Japan, revealed the fact that Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which is one of the biggest Japanese defense contractors, were hit to apparently to steal information on nuclear plants as well as defense equipment.
Okay, and you say that it came out. So I'm assuming that when companies reveal that they were the victims of a cyber attack, it must.
So the Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper scooped the news. So actually, the company didn't
authorize that sharing of that information, because I imagine that would first of all make investors or shareholders extremely nervous to know that a company has been attacked, and then it also might shake confidence in the company as well. If why were they attacked? Do they not have good safeguards in place? So that seems like something that many companies might not be so forthcoming about, to reveal that something like that happened to them. And did they find out who the culprits were? Do we know who's responsible for that attack?
So it's always difficult to have timely and correct attribution of cyber attacks, because you can launch borderless cyber attacks. So if the adversary is located outside your country, how you identify who is your attacker?
And it almost seems like in that case, that's where international cooperation might play a role. Does it?
Yes. Well, if you have a good relationship with that country.
All right, and then I think a big one that a lot of people remember, I know I certainly was paying attention to this, was in South Korea very recently, and I know a lot of people initially pointed fingers at the North Koreans, thinking, oh, they're behind this, ATMs are down, things are getting crazy. So can you tell us a little bit about that attack?
So on March 20th, several South Korean TV broadcasters and banks were hit by very coordinated cyber attacks to paralyze their services. And because South Korean banks had been already hit by cyber attacks a couple of times before, so they had been already well prepared for that kind of cyber attacks. So literally, they were able to recover their services in a short period of time. Whereas TV broadcasters had not been under that kind of cyber attacks before, so they didn't, compared to banks, they were not well prepared enough for that. So it took more time for them to recover.
So when you say broadcasters, what happened in that case? Were the stations just down?
So their computer systems went down. So they had to write down the script by hand.
Oh, I see. And you also mentioned that there were some big cases that happened outside of Asia. So what happened there?
Well, I think the March 20th cyber attacks on South Korea is the perfect example that cyber attacks can be physical disruption to your critical infrastructure, because banking system is part of critical infrastructure in Japan and also in the United States. And for instance, in January 2003, a computer worm infected a computer network of Ohio State's nuclear power plants.
Okay.
And it disabled a safety monitoring system for 5 hours. So
That's a long time.
So it means that if you had a meltdown at the nuclear power plant in the Ohio State, you had no way to figure out what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, there wasn't that kind of incident happened. And also back in January 2008, a Polish 14-year-old boy modified his TV remote control to change track points of train system in Poland and derailed 4 vehicles.
Okay, this just seems to me, I mean, we talked about a little bit about it earlier, but just the nature of these threats, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a malicious attack by a government. It can be some teenager at home experimenting and saying, oh, I wonder if this is possible. And how do you develop, I mean, I feel like that must be such a challenge to develop safeguards against that and to protect yourself against those kinds of attacks. And I'm sure that there are many people who, you know, work very hard on building safeguards and building walls, but it seems like it must be a constant, tiring challenge.
So I think we have to apply 2 approaches toward cybersecurity. One is to increase your safeguards to mitigate threats, but at the same time you have unfortunately limited resources to protect your resources, assets, and yourselves in a private capacity, in organization capacity, or government capacity. So the second approach is going to be how to assure your mission. So even if you're attacked, you have to make sure your mission is going to be completed.
And what are the, how difficult is it to trace where these attacks are coming from? I know it gets mentioned in the media a lot, you know, that it's very difficult because things can be routed through all different places. Is it that difficult? Is it very difficult to determine where some of these attacks are coming from?
So some people say that, well, sometimes if you read news articles, they say that, well, IP addresses are located in this specific country, so must be from here. But you can route your cyber attacks from many different places. So IP address can give you one clue, but doesn't identify who was your attacker. So that's why I think it's totally correct to argue that the timely and correct attribution is really challenging.
What are the major upcoming threats or threats that are perhaps on the horizon that cybersecurity analysts like yourself are considering? So I know, you know, we talked about attacks on critical infrastructure, but is there anything else that we should be aware of that might be possible in the next few years or in the next decade or so, things that we should probably start thinking about now before they become major issues?
So I think the 2 biggest issues in terms of cybersecurity, the cyber espionage and also cyber sabotage to our critical infrastructure.
So in terms of espionage, does that just mean, you know, monitoring what other companies are doing and taking perhaps national security secrets?
Well, espionage can be in multiple layers. One can be to steal your private information and also trade secrets from companies, and also can be national defense related information.
All right, and is that something that Japan is thinking about and trying to prepare against now?
Well, not only Japan, but also any other countries, including the United States, trying to and have to be prepared for that.
Okay. I think one of the things that a lot of people would be interested in is where China stands on this whole issue, because I know that the Chinese often get blamed for a lot, I mean, as does the US actually, but I guess from a regional perspective, I know the Chinese get, you know, pointed out a lot in terms of espionage and lifting secrets and stealing things. I mean, what do you think China gets a bad rap, or do you think perhaps they've earned that reputation?
I think because we had a very big report on Chinese espionage published by Mandiant. It's a U.S. cybersecurity company. So after that, so I think the Mandiant report was really a game changer, not limited to the United States, but also in the whole international community that, well, so this is happening in China. So this kind of cyber espionage is going on from the Chinese side. So I think that really absorbed our attentions enormously. So I think it was good in a way that we have more attention and we have better awareness about cyber threats. But at the same time, I think it's wrong to just point up our fingers to China because cyber threats can be derived from any part of the world. Because it can be individuals, it can be organizations, and it can be a state actor.
So it can come from anywhere. And if we're talking about China, we have to talk about the U.S., especially with what Edward Snowden has revealed to be a massive surveillance program by the United States all over the world. What was the Japanese reaction to that like? Did the Japanese were they surprised? Did they know? What was the reaction like?
I think, it seems to me that the Japanese paid more attention to the protection of the private information, and I do not see many discussions on the intelligence capability or how to protect from like surveillance system like that. It's more like the private information prevention.
So we've talked a lot about cybersecurity from a defense perspective in terms of how do we safeguard against this, how do we work with other countries to make this not happen. What about cyber attacks or cyber warfare? How do you see that, I guess, being used by governments or by corporations aggressively, in an aggressive manner? So do you think that cyber warfare can be a tool that will be used by governments more extensively in the future?
Well, there's no specific definition of cyber warfare, and I noticed that lots of media venues use the term cyber war, but the definition used by the media is very different from the traditional definition of war. Because in cyberspace, the definition of violence to force your adversary to obey your will, political will, is going to be very different. So it can be a physical disruption to your system, but it can be but the effects will be the secondary effects by the cyber tools. Because for instance, if you cause a meltdown of nuclear plants, you may kill people near the nuclear plants, but it's going to be a secondary effects, and you don't know when it's going to happen. But if you use a bomb, you can kill people.
All right, well, we will take a short break right here, and we're going to come back after the break. We'll talk a little bit more about international cooperation, and we'll also have Miho's final thoughts on cybersecurity. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii. Our show today is Asia in Review, and we've been discussing international cooperation on cybersecurity. I'm your host, Ellise Akazawa, and my guest today is Mihoko Matsubara, who is a cybersecurity analyst at Hitachi Systems in Tokyo. Miho is just here very briefly in Honolulu, so we're very grateful that you were able to stop by Think Tech today and sit down and have a chat with me. So over the break it came up, what exactly does a cybersecurity analyst do? That seems to be a little bit broad and like it could be a little bit vague and you could do all different kinds of things. What is it that, I mean, you don't have to explain what you do specifically in your job, but what does a cybersecurity analyst do?
Oh, it can be really wide variety of job capacity. But in my case, I do analysis of regional threats, geopolitical threats, and I also do analysis of policy, comparing Japanese cybersecurity policy to American system. Or, for instance, the Japanese government recently signed a cybersecurity cooperation agreement with NATO.
Okay.
So I think what it means for cybersecurity for Japan and also for NATO.
And I don't want you to reveal too much about your job or what you do, but do you spend time thinking at all about, forecasting, I guess, potential future attacks? Do you think about strategies and how to prevent attacks? Is that also a part of your job? Or is that someone else's job?
Well, so the Hitachi has a cybersecurity research center, and the team I belong to have also technical background people, and who do vulnerability who do vulnerability test to identify what kind of vulnerabilities that each company or organization who ask for our help in their system, so that they can mitigate the future risks. Okay. And also, if anything happens, unfortunately, we can also do recovery.
Okay. So for major corporations, do they typically have their own in-house cybersecurity team, or is that something they would contract out to someone or to a company like Hitachi?
I think it depends on the scale of your organization. If it's big enough, then you can have in-house people to do that kind of job. But if you are small or mid-sized businesses, you don't have much manpower and resources, so you have to outsource.
Okay. That sounds really interesting. That sounds like you've got an interesting job. So back to international cooperation on cybersecurity. We talked a lot about the importance of, first establishing bilateral relationships as well as multilateral relationships and agreements with other states for things like information sharing and threat analysis. What other steps do you think would be necessary to strengthen the international regime on cybersecurity cooperation?
So information sharing is one step. But if you can get a very good information to know that what's going to happen within like 1 week, but if you do not have the capabilities to utilize that information, you can do nothing about it. So I think that in addition to the good mechanism to share information on cyber threats, you also have to have in-house capabilities to utilize that information to mitigate threats and or identify further threats or vulnerabilities.
Okay. So how can, I guess, individuals contribute to the overall cybersecurity picture? Or is there nothing that individuals can do? Is it solely in the purview of government and private sector, like large businesses?
Actually, there are a lot that individual can do for cybersecurity, because each one of us belongs to a venue or organization, like a company, or your family belongs to a company or a government or the industry, and each organization has something to protect for their resources or their own people. And if someone has very low awareness of cybersecurity or security overall, you can be the weakest link. And our adversary is smart enough to identify you and attack you to steal the information they really want to get, even though you are not the main target. But you want to be the first target.
So what if I am just, let's say, an average employee at a company here in Honolulu? Do I need to be thinking about safeguarding information and being careful with what I do online?
Yeah, why don't you save the world?
But I mean, is that something that the average citizen needs to be concerned about? Let's say, I work at a foreign policy think tank, so I would imagine that some of what we do, even though it's pretty much open source, and all of our information is easily and freely available on the web, I would imagine that, some people would be interested in that. But let's just say I work at, a human resources consulting firm, or if I work at a construction company, do I still need to be worried about cyber attacks or cyber threats, or is it just not?
Okay, so suppose you are working for a consulting firm, in Honolulu, and assume that one of your customers will be companies located in Oahu, and also maybe military components here in Oahu, because there are a lot of big military presence in Oahu. And I don't think, the adversary may not necessarily target your own company, but they may want to explore what kind of information or contacts you have in your various customers. And if they can hack into your computer, they can identify, it's interesting, Ellise has a contact with this military general.
Okay, I see.
And they can use phishing email to use your email accounts to hack into that army general.
Interesting. So people, no matter in what sector you work in, you definitely need to be aware of the threats and the risks that are out there. And in terms of, we talked a little bit about international, how states can work together to share information. When sharing information, you mentioned that it's important to start with allies first because you have mutual trust and you have mutual values. But does that also present a national security threat if I'm explaining to you weaknesses and vulnerabilities that I may have, or if I'm sharing information with you? That also seems like there might be some risk. Even among allies, there might be some risk.
Well, so you have to have mutual trust to share information, or even if I reveal our own vulnerabilities to you, you will not exploit that information to use against us. But you also have to have confidence in our information assurance system that, I will not use your information to sell that information to a third party.
So that really seems, how do you even build trust? I imagine that, among allies that a basis of trust already exists. But in terms of other countries that you may have an adversarial relationship with, it seems like building that trust might take a long time or might be problematic.
Well, there will be wide variety level of the sensitiveness of each information piece. So you can share very, very sensitive information with your trusted ally, but not necessarily with a friendly country.
Okay. I know that Washington and Beijing recently started talking about having some sort of cybersecurity cooperation agreement. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's always better to have a communication channel to establish, because if you do not know whom to talk to, then if any emergency happens, you never know whom to call to settle information or to figure out solution for that situation.
So do you think that Japan also might be interested in the possibility of exploring a similar type of agreement with China?
Well, so Japan already has an agreement with South Korea and China in terms of the not trilateral agreement, but I don't see any media coverage over the trilateral cooperation over the last couple of years. So I don't know what is going on actually.
Oh, okay. So it could be possible potentially, just
It can be a good venue to start to. So we can say that we already have this trilateral agreement and a framework. So why don't we start out with Japan, South Korea, or Japan, China, to strengthen this tie first.
All right. Well, that brings us to the very end of Asia in Review today. We were talking about cooperation on cybersecurity, cyber attacks, cyber threats, all things cyber. We've been here with Mihoko Matsubara, who is a cybersecurity analyst at Hitachi Systems, as well as an adjunct fellow at Pacific Forum CSIS. So Miho, we're so grateful that you were able to join us in studio in Honolulu today. Please visit thinktechhawaii.com. We've got all sorts of great programming related to this and other topics. It's been great having you here. I'm your host, Ellise Akazawa. We'll see you next week.